Welcome to the Booktopia podcast. I'm Ben Hunter, Booktopia's fiction category manager, and today I'm going to have a chat with Malcolm Knox. Malcolm Knox is one of the most prolific authors working in Australia today, not just as a novelist, but also as an author of non-fiction and a journalist, an award-winning journalist. His latest novel is called Bluebird, and it's hilarious. Malcolm, welcome to the podcast.
G'day, Ben.
Congratulations on what really is a savagely funny book, which I think will speak volumes to anyone who has ever lived in a coastal town or suburb or has known someone who has, particularly in the kind of urban cluster of Sydney. What inspired you to start writing Bluebird, and did you surprise yourself with the end product?
It was initially inspired by a place, just a building which is very much like the lodge in Bluebird, perched on the side of a cliff at a beach in Sydney, and it is only connected to the outside world by a wooden staircase going up between the houses up above, and another wooden staircase going down directly to the sand. So it's almost the perfect beach house. Except it shouldn't be there. It's like somebody got away with something while council were looking the other way somewhere, because it has no access to the outside world. I don't know how it got put together. It was derelict for the first few years when I was living near it and seeing it most days. It's been done up a bit now, but I just used to sit there and think, you know, what could be the life that went on in a house like that? Who might have lived there over the years? And you know, what dramas can I project into that house? So it was very much a place-sparked story. And when you talk about what surprised me, I guess it's the thing that's ended up with your reaction. You know, you said it was a hilarious book. It actually turned into a much funnier story than I maybe initially conceived, and you know, whether it was the characters getting away from me or you know, something happening completely unexpectedly that they were doing that made me laugh. So in the end, look, I'm really glad that you found it funny, because it turned for me into a funny book, as in I enjoyed the humour in it the more as it went on, and that kind of collected like a snowball as it went. And yeah, you never know with humour, do you? That you know, people might just scratch their heads and say, "Wow, you know, that was really close to the bone." Whereas I think, oh, you know, I thought it was funny.
I'm sensing that, and I get this in your writing as well, that you've got a big cast of characters, which are frequently very funny. But they're also very close to your heart, especially Gordon. Do you want to tell us about the character of Gordon and how you've managed to craft a novel, a narrative around this guy who is so superbly passive, you know, just completely incapable of involving himself in any kind of conflict, even though he's at the complete epicenter, almost drowning in it?
Yeah, well, all of that is there in the setup of the book, in what's happened immediately before the beginning of the book, which is that Gordon is this, you know, middle-aged guy who's lived by Bluebird Beach for his entire life. He's kind of slipped through unnoticed in a lot of ways. Had a good life. He's married with a lovely teenage son. All of a sudden, his wife Kelly, she's snapped. She's had a fling with Gordon's best mate, so there's humiliation doubled up with obviously the rupture. She wants to leave him, but she has a stepmother who owns this place, the lodge, and has inflicted it upon the family as her scheme to keep them together. So Kelly wanted to run away from Gordon, but the stepmother, Leonie, has made sure Gordon moves into the lodge with Kelly and they can't get away from each other. With Ben, their son, and with Lou, who's Gordon's goddaughter, who's turned up from the middle of nowhere quite recently in his life. So he's this character who's he's kind of got everything given to him on a plate, but he never knows what to do with it. And he's never really able, as you say, he lets things happen to him, and he's infuriating in that way. But also I find fairly true to life that, you know, most of us are more like that than we're dynamic action heroes. In concrete terms, what Gordon's problem is that he's been given this place, the lodge, which is his dream house, it's anybody's dream house, and yet he doesn't have the money to meet his obligations. This leads those around him who love him to try to help him, but in ways that are kind of comically destructive of themselves, of Gordon, and things just spiral from bad to worse. And at the same time, he's very much a sandwich generation person, where he's looking after the younger generation and kind of coming to terms with all the changes that he doesn't understand in their lives, while at the same time has obligations to his own parents, who are spinning out of control in completely different ways. So it's one of those stories where you've got a person in an unstable position initially, where you think he's just hanging on by his claws by his fingernails to complete disarray, and that's the beginning, and things only get worse from there.
And this building, this decaying building, the lodge is kind of the epicenter of it all, isn't it? You've got Gordon and his family trying to hold together there. But it's also bigger than just the family, isn't it, Malcolm? He's got this whole crew of old salts, including the best mate who's slept with his wife. And he kind of just welcomes them all into this crumbling beach house. And you meet the most fantastic cast of characters. And you hear the most profane and Australian and incredible dialogue, don't you?
Well, they're a dying tribe, and that was, I suppose, I didn't really have a serious intent, but it kind of turns into when you spend so long writing something, you wonder what you're really doing, what you're trying to get to the heart of. And for me, in this case, it was about capturing this tribe in the last moment before they disappear completely, and that means they're fighting to hang on to the beach, and not hang on in a territorial sense of trying to keep others out. That battle's long been lost. Money is moving in, other people are moving in. The sense of everybody knowing everybody else at this beach has been long lost. After it's been lost, these vestiges of that community are still there, and they're kind of crazy because they are there still. And Gordon, I suppose, is the personification of that, in that when it's a beautiful day, sunny day, perfect waves down at the beach, he won't go. It's like a personal cut off your nose to spite your face boycott, because he just can't handle the place when there are other people there. But when it's a horrible squally day with wind and rain blowing in from the southeast and nobody else is there, and blue bottles in the water and everything, that's when Gordon goes to the beach to have a surf. And again, that's a kind of a statement of that last little sliver of self-determination that he can hold on to and tell himself that this is still a place that he kind of has a stake in.
Yeah, and there's this wonderful tension I read in it that Gordon particularly and his whole crew, and they have names like Snake, they're great guys. They're incredibly nostalgic for a beachside suburb in which they grew up and a kind of idyllic life, but they're also cripplingly aware that it wasn't ideal at all. that it was really violent, that there was serious inequality then as there is for them now, that there's racism, that there's all kinds of nastiness going on. Is that something that you're playing with? Like, that, do you think the mainstream of our arts and culture today is still mythologizing or sentimentalizing this world of violence and inequality in a kind of echo chamber, going back to C.J. Dennis and Banjo Patterson?
I think that it's something quite particular to this generation. Generation of people, say, born between the 60s and the 80s or 90s, born during that period, where you look at an older generation who, and you know, these people in Bluebird are kind of overshadowed by those, you know, older heroes, the wartime generation, their fathers and grandfathers, you know, the tough men who owned the beach. If you grew up in the 70s and 80s, you probably look at those older people as, even though they were tough and they were seasoned by war and depression and you know, all sorts of other things, they were also quite innocent, because they were innocent of the things that happened during the 70s, 80s and 90s, which is that there's this kind of gradual collection of the tragic happening around beaches, and whether in Sydney, you know, there was a string of gay bashings at beachside locations. There were and continue to be a whole lot of suicides. It was a chosen place of suicide for you know, many people in Sydney, and that generation was sort of left with the overhang of the myth-making that came before them. And they're also caught between that and a younger generation who are making their own myths. So I feel that you can't have grown up at that time without, you know, that really bittersweet feeling about the beach, that it's and you know, that's not to mention drownings and accidental deaths at the beach. And you know, we've grown up with that around us, and you can't go, if you're of that generation, you can't go to the beach and live at the beach with a completely clear head about the beachside myth. And, you know, in our story of Gordon, that ends up having a very personal dimension. So I guess he eventually has to confront what many readers would be asking him from the early pages, which is, why are you still hanging on to it? Why, when everything's flowing against you, do you have this kind of pathological need? And it's not for your own benefit. You're not benefiting from it in any way at all, but it's the one thing holding you together, this determination, stubbornness to hold on to it. Why? What lies behind that? And, you know, I really think that for a lot of us, it is the mixture of bitter and sweet in our lives that creates determination, creates the will to keep going. It's not the feeling that everything's going our way or that everything is against us. It's a very kind of potent cocktail of good and bad in our memories.
You've got a story that's very touching, but told in a way that's really welcoming and savagely funny frequently. Uh, do you consider this book to be literary fiction? Do you call yourself a literary author?
uh, Literary fiction is often defined by what it's not. So if it's not comfortably a thriller, it's not comfortably a crime novel, it's not a romance, it doesn't follow the rules of the genres. Literary fiction is kind of what's left. And if it's also trying, I guess, to be a bit inventive with the language, you would say, as literary. And, I think I've always been a bit more concerned with getting the reader to keep turning pages than to reflect on the depth of the thought or the brilliance of the language or anything like that. I really want the reader to keep on reading. So I don't know. You find every author is a little bit uncomfortable with that conversation about how to define themselves generically. But yeah, I sort of think if there's this, and then other, I'm part of the other.
An outsider. You had a really successful career as a journalist, and you've written a series of books on non-fiction. And as part of that, you've lived and breathed the world of sport, surfing, cricket especially. In your Walkley winning opinion, Malcolm, is Australia truly a sporting nation?
I think definitely a lot less than we used to be.
Right.
Sport is, maybe in some way it has it's mirrored in this book. The myth of the centrality of sport to Australian culture is preserved through commerce and marketing now, much more than it is through reality. Audiences for sporting, big sporting events are generally in decline. Mm-hmm. I think the way the Australian cricket team, say, was, really in the centre of the Australian breast that we would beat on national occasions. I don't think that's the case anymore. Sport is still potent, obviously, for the emotional attachments of people, but it's a much more fragmented sporting landscape now. It's not a unifying thing. So, are we a sporting nation? The good thing is that Australians are so active in sport and recreation. That's by far the most important thing when you say, are we a sporting nation? And that keeps growing, and that is fantastic. And it's almost come as the old image of, the Norm Life Be In It fella who would sit, with a beer cradled on his belly watching cricket or footy all day. That's gone into decline. And so, yeah, it's a long-winded way of answering your question. I think we are very much a sporting nation, but in a different way from the way we were 20 or 30 years ago.
As a sports writer, do you write for a different audience now than you did when you began more than a decade ago?
I write very much for the spectator. I'm not an insider in the sense of trying to provide. We have really good journalists and columnists who are great at getting to the heart of what's going on the inside and getting information. I think I'm just a person in the outer who says things often a bit unfiltered. and I see myself as just another kind of person trying to entertain their friends who are sitting around them with them, watching a TV or in a stand or something. So very much from the outside in, and that's probably who I've always felt I've been writing for.
Your writing is lauded by the likes of Charlotte Wood and Christos Tsiolkas. And you're seen as one of the really big Australian writers working today. And reading this book, I can kind of see why. Who are your literary heroes? Or are there any good authors you've recently discovered in kind of recent times of mandatory isolation?
To answer your second question first, for some reason, around the start of this isolation period, I was walking around the house and I've got books everywhere, and I'm thinking, there are so many great books here that I've only read once, or I've read a long time ago, and maybe it was also that need for comfort in these times. But I went around collecting books I'd read decades ago, just to reread them and see if they stood up to my memory of how good they were. Many haven't. Some have, and some have kind of been transformed, or my relationship to them has been transformed. A couple of weeks ago, I read The Remains of the Day again. An example of one that I was just astonished by what a perfect book this was, and it is as perfect now as it was in 1990 or 88 or whenever it was when I first read it. Ragtime by E.L. Doctorow is another where I just thought, wow, that is perfection. Just last week, I read Trainspotting, which seems very much of its time, but I just thought it was an astonishing achievement to render a world in that Scottish dialect and have the reader thinking in Scottish. Going further back to influences, look, I was always in my formative years. It was mainly the big kind of 19th century French novelists, French and Russian novelists mainly that I read. And I did my university thesis on Émile Zola and his cycle of 20 novels around a family. And I just reread the first of those that made me fall in love with him as a kind of a grand documentary novelist of a family and a time, and with this great intellectual content as well. Unbelievably depressing. I couldn't believe now how depressing this book was. Like Thomas Hardy, there's sort of a sense of inevitable doom hanging over Zola's novels, but his ability to just get the whole of the world, in this case Paris, of that time, was one of the key influences that made me want to write novels.
Sounds like you've done some fantastic reading during all this time.
Very retro.
Yeah. I want to ask how you balance the demands of a very prolific and varied writing career. You have multiple books going at once, and you've got the column or articles as well. How do you do it all?
The demands of journalism are not as great now for me as they used to be. I'm not a full-time journalist anymore, and the time I need to put in is nowhere near as great as it was. It's difficult, but it's not that difficult. I'm working hard doing something I love. So there are hours in the day. You'd probably be better to direct that question at the people who live with me and have to put up with the after effects of the stress, which is harder for them than it is for me. But no, look, you're probably asking how you can get the headspace for writing a novel while you're writing other things. I find when I'm in that novel writing period, it kind of eclipses everything else, and I'm probably a pretty mediocre writer in my other fields at the time when I'm working hard on a novel, because it is an obsessive pursuit, and you want it to be, for it to be effective. You've got to be completely immersed in it. So I don't know.
I wonder if that stress, that economy of time you have to devote to each little passion, kind of drives the creativity or the output.
Yeah, I think for some people maybe not, but for me, it's even at the point where I write a weekly column for the newspaper. I spend days worrying about not having any idea what I'm going to have to do, and even on the last day when I have to file, I'm walking around in a state of some tension, just going, okay, this is it. Finally, I've cracked. I have nothing. Some readers would agree with that. Even after I've produced it, I've still got nothing. But it is the pressure of that final deadline coming up that spurs something. But I'm not sure if it's always successful. But that is the mechanism that operates on me.
If you had to walk away from either fiction or fact, journalism, non-fiction tomorrow, and only devote your attention to one field, and you would be just as rich and famous in either case, which path would you take?
Yeah, or poor and famous. I'd obviously say writing novels is the main thing for me, and it always has been the main thing. But it's not a highly remunerative pursuit, and I've got a family, and my kids are fortunately coming to the end of their dependent period of life. But for the last 18 years, I've had 2 kids, depending on both of me and my wife to support us all. So if you're asking about that fantasy, yes, I would only write novels. But then I think, going back to your earlier question, I wouldn't function so well without the pressure. Just given an infinite horizon of time to write a novel, I'd probably end up doing nothing, because there'd be no pressure, none of that urgency that I seem to need.
What are you working on next?
I'm actually really trying for just a few weeks to not think about that and do that. It's quite hard, and that's a time when I'm really hard to live with. But yeah, I've got a couple of ideas that I'm not sure. This is ideas for novels, and I'm not sure whether they'll be, whether they'll have the juice in them or not until I really give it a crack. And that's happened to me quite a lot as well. I've gone with something for 10 or 20,000 words and then just given it up. So I don't know. I just really would like to be able to relax for even one day. Preferably a few weeks.
Well, Bluebird is a superb novel, and I think you've earned a rest.
Thank you,
Malcolm. Thank you very much for your time today. I want to ask one more question. Your imagined world of Ocean City, which is a kind of thinly veiled, corporatized Sydney. where do you see the fate of that city in the, particularly in its beachside communities in the next, say, 10 years?
Wow, that's it's a question I've thought about a lot, and yet I don't think I've ever really thought about it to the point where I've had to answer it. And then you throw in the changed world that we're living in, and how does that affect that location? Obviously, from a book, I'm portraying pressure, portraying an increasing sense of people being hemmed in, and that's the great myth of the beach, that it is a place that offers the idea and even the reality of freedom and the infinite, when actually the beach, in every way, in a city like that, is a very competitive, claustrophobic, hemmed-in environment. And then we have these weather events where the ocean's coming in and eating these beaches up. Our local beaches at the moment are really exposed. There are all these rocks there that you've never seen before, and certainly up at Wamberal and Narrabeen, they had houses crumbling into the sea in those weather events a few weeks ago. So I guess I would just see more of the same pressures increasing, and also spreading out of the city up the coast, and that dynamic of the world closing in on you from the outside is probably being felt more and more by people in regional coastal towns, and even small coastal towns, little one-shop retreats where people are going to move more and more because they can work remotely, they want to be out of the cities. They want to live somewhere a bit cheaper. There's going to be more of that pressure sort of diffusing throughout, both on the west and the east coast of Australia, out of the cities into the country. So that's probably, if I'm bold enough to make any forecasts, it's that Ocean City, that the place of that book can equally apply to Bateman's Bay, or Browley down south, or Crescent Head, or even the smaller places that are currently undiscovered. So not just your big regional centres, but everywhere on the coast. It feels like the pressure of people upon that environment is just going to get greater and greater
as the environment comes under deeper threat.
Yeah, it's people getting themselves from both directions, whether through building or through the macro effects of what they've done on the ocean and the climate. Both of these forces are coming together on that little strip of land.
Yes. Malcolm, thank you very much for your time today, and for your fantastic new novel. It's really something to go out and read.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks a lot.
Bluebird is published by Allen and Unwin, and you can buy it and all Malcolm's novels and non-fiction from booktopia.com.au right now.
Thank you for listening to the Booktopia podcast channel. Don't forget, you can subscribe to us on SoundCloud and iTunes for free, and get access to hundreds of author discussions, book analysis pieces, and more. Or, if your eyes need a workout, head to Booktopia TV on YouTube. Don't forget, for all books featured in this podcast, and for access to a whole bunch of other fun content on our blog, head to Booktopia, Australia's local bookstore, at booktopia.com.au.